I can go. Excellent. It's 2:59. Actually, it's 3 o'clock. So good afternoon. We're going to try to make this as painless and as interesting as possible. I really want it to be a conversation with you. My name is Bob Recker. I'm from Waterloo, Iowa. Happy to be here. Never been to this conference before. And my first disclosure is I really don't know anything about organic farming. So this has been a huge learning opportunity for me. I'll give you a little short background on myself and then kind of where I am with what I'm doing and where I'm trying to get to from here. But we really need to have you guys involved. We really need to have you challenge me, ask the questions. Let's make it fun. So my short history is strip intercropping. Does that term mean anything to many of you? Alternating 20 to 30 foot strips of corn versus soybeans. I first got exposed to it a number of years ago when I was still at work in a corporate job. And then I got interested as an engineer, kind of like, well, this is interesting, and started pursuing it really about sunlight. And then went on to some little larger scale plots. And eventually, as an engineer, got curious because the first question people would always ask is, what's the best solar orientation? So I had a friend that loaned me some ground, and so I put a little plot in that had a little bit of everything. It was a mistake, but it was interesting. And then we had some interesting experience there. So I've been at this since about 2004, doing some yield checks. I retired in 2008, formed an LLC to say, hey, I'm going to retire someday, and I got to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, so I think the sunlight thing's kind of interesting. And it was like payback the American farmer for feeding me for 41 years and my family. So did a number of different things really around sunlight. My primary deal is sunlight. There's people running around here that are really good with weeds. There's people running around that are really good with bugs and microbes and soil samples and all that. I'm the sunlight guy. It's easier. We all get the same amount, right? We just got to take advantage of it. And then kind of by accident got into some things that became interesting and have kind of taken on a little of their own momentum, if you will. This is kind of what I do. I am a one-man band, an individual private researcher, if you will. I am currently operating under a SARE grant. Thank you, taxpayers. I finally got on their radar this last year after all these years. And what I found is farmers don't like to write checks, and they're skeptical of big changes and all of that. So the SARE process has really been pretty good. But I am going to share some ideas with you this afternoon. The worst case scenario is you see what I say and you say, that looks kind of interesting. Well, this guy said it would work, so you go do it on a large portion of your operation. Don't do that. Don't do that. A good risk management strategy is take 4% of your acres and use that as a little experiment for incremental change. The new variety, the new tool, the new process. And then of that 4%, take 10% of it and do something crazy. So I'll do the math for you. I've been in presentations with people with 10 acres in the last couple of days, and I've been at the table with people with 1,000 acres. I'm not sure if there's any 10. I guess our keynote speaker was just 3,600 acres, I think he said. So for however many acres you got, every day you're out there driving around looking, figuring out what's going on, trying to fix problems, do things better next time. And then you're doing a little bit of experimenting. So if you're a 100-acre guy, take 4 acres and outsource some work, some process, rent a tool, try a new chemical, new bug, whatever. But try it on 4 of your 100 acres, or 4%. And then some of the things I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon are kind of in the crazy category. And that's where I have spent my time, and that's where I like to be, and that's why I'm so unprofitable. And so anyhow, take 10% of that 4 acres or half an acre, and I did the math, if you have a quarter mile field, that's like 6 rows. So it's like you take one planter pass or one round and try something really different the first year. And then if that works, then you can expand it. Then you can turn it, it's no longer radical to you, then it becomes incremental. So, and one more disclosure. How many of you have ever heard of 60-inch corn rows? A few, good. You're here. My disclosure, and if you're out there talking to people at the elevator, at the coffee shop, your brother-in-law, say, I heard this guy talking about 60-inch rows, and he says, well, that's a bad idea.
Crazy.
or whatever. It's not a good idea for the commercial corn grower that just wants to haul a lot of corn to the elevator and has a scorched earth weed treatment strategy, because he's not going to end up getting more corn. Based on the tests that I've done, and they are very unscientific, but this is kind of the conventional wisdom. There are people doing work and reporting it. Generally, it's about 5% less yield, but the tolerance on that number is plus or minus 15%. So if you're really good, you really know what you're doing, you gotta do a good job of planting, manage your nutrients, right row orientation, you can make a little more corn. But, and if you're really thinking about this, north-south twin rows is the little silver BB, I guess, not silver bullet, silver BB that might make it work. And I don't have data because I'm not big enough or well enough funded to shake out varieties, but it does matter. Over the years, every now and then I've run across a variety that just doesn't care about more sunlight. Most of them do. But every now and then God has a sense of humor and I find out about it. Usually when people haven't been successful, it's because they either couldn't get their population high enough on the individual rows. The goal for starting point, same field population. So if you're putting in half as many rows, you need twice the row population. And I'm going to talk about field versus row yields here in a minute. And so either they didn't get the population up or they had weed pressure. And with all that open space, if you don't have anything, nature abhors a vacuum. So you're going to have weeds. You don't think you have weeds in your weed bank, and you've all had little planter skips and then things come in and you send somebody out with a hoe, they fix it. So you got to have cover crops. And so I've evolved away from the commercial growers in the people I'm working with because, as you all know, about 85% of the commercial growers aren't interested in doing cover crops. So that's where we want to go. Back in 2012, and every year I have a couple pictures, and I take thousands of pictures and do a lot with individual data, but I'm really kind of a geek on imagery. But in 2012, we had a guy that was doing 20-inch corn strip intercropping, so he had a 20-foot corn strip, 12 rows, 20 inches, and then a 12-row bean strip. And so I went out there and he pushed the population up on the outer edges. That became one of the rules. You gotta get the corn up there, get the population up so that the corn can take advantage of the sunlight. Because most of the corn is bred for monocrop, uniform sunlight. But you give it an extra edge and away it goes. So in this particular field, the bar is higher, not because the yield is higher, but because there's more plants. But my process is I go out and I weigh at least the group, and usually I weigh each individual plant. And if it's really important, I'll go out and I'll measure and record the distance between each stalk, and I actually calculate a yield for each and every ear in there. And at this point, somebody usually holds their hands up and says, Bob, you need to get a life. Yeah. There's got to be better ways to spend your time than doing that. But in this particular field, in this particular year, same ears transported back to town. And this was 2012, and this guy's really good at growing corn. So it was a 220 to 240 good corn. in the middle of the strip, it was good corn. But out here, where he had more population, more plants, and more sunlight, and I'm pretty sure at this point he didn't do anything special with nutrients. And that's the other part of it. If you really want to make this thing work, you got to manage the nutrients to the row. But we had 437 bushel per acre corn, and outside row 290, and then it gets regular. And out here 247, 283. So engineer Bob says, "Whoa, wait a minute! It clearly God's trying to send a message that says you ought to have 4-row corn strips." Because if you had that overall average, in the middle, this was like 230 bushel corn. But the strip averaged 275 if you average all of these numbers. But the outer 4 rows were 350 bushels. So it's kind of like, whoa, yes.
This is in 2012. Where was this at?
This is near Denver, Iowa. Not Colorado, Denver, Iowa, north of Waterloo.
You must have not had the same kind of drought we had in 2012.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
This guy's, he's good, but yeah, and it varies. Yeah, again, this was normal for him. These days, he's getting, excuse me, a fair amount more. So at this point, if you're skeptical of me and what I'm talking about, it's kind of like, wait a minute. And so part of the deal here, and this is sitting around the campfire one time, one of my friends says, "Bob, first liar doesn't have a chance." So part of what makes this interesting is this next row over here, 30 inches over, was a bean row. So for when I was working the strip intercropping game, that's not the right word, when that was my venue, better word, venue. When that was my venue, every row in the field was a row. So this was a legitimate 430 bushel corn. Now, if this were just cover crop, now it changes because suddenly this row has got all this other space that's not growing anything. So we're going to talk about that. But this is real and honest and pretty repeatable. I would say that usually you get like 40% more in an outside row if you kick up the population. And my statement, and I had a number of plots over a number of years, lots of them. Back up. And my statement was I could always get 400 bushel. In any kind of corn, any variety would grow 400 bushel corn. Yes, sir?
Sorry, I was a little late. What was the population you planted at?
In this case, 60,000. I think he was like 30,000 in 20-inch rows per acre. And so the population in that row would be set at 60,000. In that case, he was putting more kernels in the field because he was putting beans in here. So the population here would be, so the average population, that's a very good point, for the whole strip would be a bit higher than his 30 that he had in the middle. But in all my work, I almost always err on the side of more seed. Or, the seed corn has been bred to try to get you between 6 and 10 bushels per acre per ear, and 1/1000th of an acre. And whenever I push the population down, I get bigger ears, but I don't get more yield. And don't want to dwell too much on that. So I have evolved. You guys are really going to have to help me with questions here because I might be done too soon. But I've evolved to where, okay, good growers, I don't have any land. I have too much equipment, but I don't have any land. I have growers that tolerate or are intrigued with what I do, and they let me come onto their farms and do things. I tried doing my own thing early on, and I learned that I didn't have 40 years of experience of trying to grow corn. I couldn't handle the weeds. I didn't like spraying stuff. I didn't have a spray certification, and I didn't understand. I hated chemistry in school, and I didn't understand stuff. But if I could have a grower just give me a hole in his field, I'd go in, and my promise to him is 1 minute. I won't take more than 1 minute of your planting season, and that's all they'd ever give me. And they're planting, and they lift up their planter, skip over between 50 and a couple hundred rows and keep going. And then I show up with my little planter and do my little light experiments and all that sort of stuff. And then at harvest time, my promise was, I won't take more than 1 minute of your harvest season. You're harvesting, you skip over my plot, and then I'll show up with my little combine and my little weigh wagons, and off I go. It was really a nice deal, because they got to look at some of these radical ideas without having to go through the pain and the agony and all that. Because most growers, and the bigger and better they are, the less interested they are in monkey business. They got things to do, they've got no extra time, and off they go. So this is my planter. You haven't seen a central commodity 4-row system lately.
No, not on the front.
But it started out as a $1,500 6-row planter, and I'd hate to admit how much money I've got in it at this point, but a lot. It's very modern. It does have hydraulically adjustable row widths, and one of my premises is I don't have enough land, I don't have enough customers that are willing to give me the land to do replicated trials. I can't, and the university types, they live and die by replicated trials. And so I have to kind of be able to do things compactly, which is where that got me to the 4-row rather than 6-row like it started. Plus, I run around a lot. And so I can run up and down any old highway in any town and go through traffic with this rig and it not be a problem. But I also want to always have the least number of variables in play. So if my customer was planting with his planter, then I show up with a different planter, completely different technology and all that, then you have this question about what it is. So my deal is all of my plots, and I always start with a 30-inch baseline normal population, and I'll always start with a few rows of that, and they kind of become the calibration with what the rest of the field is, or a baseline that I can talk about to people, and then this goes up to, it'll go down to like 20 inches in the center and up to like 90-inch twins. So the 90-inch twin thing becomes kind of a head scratcher, and that's what we're gonna talk about. So that's the corn. And I don't add a lot of value to the corn conversation other than giving people the idea of trying it. Because any one of you can take a planter and turn off half the rows. You can turn off half the rows and make a pass. And if you want to make twin rows, you turn off half the rows, do a U-turn, make sure you got the right rows on and off now, or you inadvertently replant it back. But you can do what I call a poor man's twin row planter for a few rows without spending a nickel. Now you do need to crank up the population, and for the people with the old gear drive, chain drive stuff, and I got boxes of sprockets and chains and really dirty fingernails. That's where I ended up with electric here, and I ended up with hydraulic downforce because I needed to be able to get in the ground. I basically have embraced the no-till thing, lock, stock, and barrel as much as possible, but that's not a requirement. I'll go into whatever the grower's doing. So the planting thing, I don't really add much to that other than planting the seed like I'm doing right here with you all. So say, well, I don't know. But then you could also say, why should I? Well, the why should you is cover crops, or the descendants of cover crops, which is grazing and organic. So that's really what my focus today is. So I got a little drill. This is a little 25 horsepower compact utility tractor. It's 48 inches wide. And one of my premises is whenever I build a piece of equipment or do something, I try to make it state of the art. Much to my chagrin, a lot of the university plots and all that sort of stuff is like really old, really out of date stuff. And I have growers that say, so why should I pay attention to what the universities say? Because they aren't even close to the yield I'm getting. They just aren't in there. But there's, so I try to have the same technology, and these are current underground ag state-of-the-art drill units, little airbags on them for down pressure. This meter is a disaster. That's going to be replaced this year. with a really nice Montag meter trailer, a cart. I don't know if the term Montag means anything to you now, but it's gonna be really nice because I wanna be able to do plots. I'm a plot guy, but I wanna be able to start with the plot level, and if the grower, after a season or two, we wanna go to a small field scale, I can. I'd rather spend all day out here with this rig than having a big rig that I can't do plots because I can't get that much land. That makes sense? I'm kind of a weird one on that. So the wide rows, and this picture here, there's a variation of it, was taken in like 2017, and it had my I should have put that picture in. It had my grower, my customer standing in it, and the cover crop was up to about here. And so I was, presenting to a group of farmers about the 60-inch deal, why it's cool and all that. And there were several people in there that were just kind of, And suddenly they sat up, started paying attention, started asking questions, and I didn't understand what was going on until after the meeting we started talking that these were guys who were trying hard to grow cover crops, not being particularly successful, and they wanted to graze them. So they saw this as like, oh, wait a minute, my cattle are gonna like that. So that's really where if you Google 60-inch rows now and you get all this stuff, you'll start to find people that are grazing, that are wanting to leave their cattle. They want to get the crop out, but they want to have enough biomass out there that they can leave their cattle out. One of my growers said, the less manure I haul, the better I like it. They're going to be healthier out there running around, and it's just going to work better. So that's where we are. This is the tractor in 60-inch rows. This happens to be 60-inch organic corn. It was actually pretty good. I've danced with organic folks a little bit, but I've never, this meeting is my deep dive into it, and it's been a blast. Because my original 60-inch rows look like this, scorched earth, nothing between them. And the yield that this field gave me in 2017 was statistically equivalent to my 30-inch rows that were a part of that test. So that's kind of what got things going, but it wasn't really until the cover crop conversation showed up. We said, okay, all right, that's interesting. So now, and what I've done now is evolved to, well, if you're gonna do wide rows, you're gonna have to do cover crops, so now I need to learn a little bit about cover crops. So, and what can you do with them? And then that got me headed down into the soil health thing a little bit. So the soil health is the station that I arrived at about a year ago. Says, well, okay, we want to do some things, and then this, for the organic guy, his strategy was he was going from commercial grain into organic. He had listened to me speak at a meeting. He went out and did a few acres of a big operation with 60-inch rows, poor man's deal. And he said, well, that's pretty interesting. Went out and bought a tractor and a planter and built his own special 60-inch planter. And off he went. And then he got involved with me to come in and plant some twin row 60s, because his planter was just a single row 60. But in that process, we were going to need to mow. And I really wanted to have a clean mowing, so I just took a belly mower and my snowblower hitch and fabricated this front mower. These are kind of gauge wheels. Not a real good adventure. But that was the goal here. This little guy has RTK auto track on it, which you don't see on a lot of lawnmowers these days. But that lets me go out and I can pick up the AB line if it's a larger field. In some cases, I'll be out there doing cover crops ahead or whatever. So I have this shed full of bits and pieces I can kind of put together. So if you're gonna go in the cover crop, there's a guy named Keith Burns out of Green Cover. He's a co-owner of Green Cover in Bladen, Nebraska. So I sent him an email or something, or picked up a catalog and had some conversations back and forth. And then I applied for and got a grant that said, look, I think there's something we can do here with using cover crops to build soil health. So every farmer, except for you guys, every farmer has some sandy knolls or a spot that just never makes you any money and all that. So my sneaky little process was to say, if I can show people that are big producers that over a period of several years, they can kind of fix that sandy spot with lush cover crops, then maybe they'll just decide they like having cover crops anyway, and more people will do it. Too early to tell if that's working or not, but I did get, thank you, federal government, I did get a little SARE grant for that. And then a good friend of mine retired, I'll show you a picture of his plot, that said, okay, I have this land, I've owned it, now I want to farm it. So I talked to Keith, I said, look, I just want a really simple cover crop, and then I'd like one, we're gonna have these wide rows, you really, okay, well, that's interesting. Wide rows, got lots of sunlight, and I don't care about corn yield. I know this field doesn't do well because it's really light sandy soil. We don't have any production history because it's always been rented out. But it looks a lot like some land that my brother had that was pretty rough until he kind of got it in shape. So we want to demonstrate that we can make the soil better. And so I need the very best that you come up with. So he gave me provided a 12 mix cover crop here, and there's a little of everything in that. And so I drilled it in with my little drill right after, a picture or not? No, I don't. A picture. I was so worried about talking too long, I took out maybe. So this little guy goes down between, back. I can go down between the rows, the 60-inch rows with the tractor any day of the year. That's the goal. On the 30-inch stuff, and this is the field, the little white trailer there is that little white trailer. This is a 5-acre field. Because it was a SARE grant, they wanted to see replications. Guess what? No surprise there. So I had some 30-inch rows, and then these are randomized, which is why it isn't perfectly uniform. So I said, okay, yep, this is a research field, and we're going to plant corn, and we're going to plant cover crops. And then, down on this end, there was we had a whole bunch of weird stuff, milpa, and purple hull peas, and chickens, and really just a zoo. It was a lot of fun. But this picture was taken in September, and the corn here is about a foot high because we didn't get any rain. Plus, and it wasn't till Keith came up for our field day, and the field day is on YouTube. I'll give you the links for that in a little bit. But you can hear the whole story if you want. But we inadvertently had gone cold turkey into organic. Now I was heartened to hear that term early at the keynote talk. We didn't think we were going to be organic when we started this, but my grower, and if you listen to the YouTube thing, he explains it. He had 3 goals. He wanted it to be a learning environment, and he wanted it to be socially responsible, meaning it looked good, smelled good, and sounded good, because there's a little drive along the side here, and an acreage, a group of acreages where he lived, and people walk up and down there. So he didn't want any manure out there and all that sort of stuff. So, okay, but we didn't put down any chemicals on this, and we didn't put down any fertilizer. So this is what you get when you take light ground, put expensive corn in the ground, and then put a really lush cover crop in there and don't get rain. We had almost no rain from when it was planted till when it was too late in about mid-August. We started getting rain. But the cover crop it was just amazing, because with all these different species, and I didn't go into it with that understanding, and I don't think Keith really did either, but he had so many species in there, it was like a diversified investment portfolio. and he had just a little bit of milpa in the mix. And if you looked at the crop, you would swear it was all not milpa, millet. You could swear it was all millet. There's just a little bit, but in that light soil, in that low water condition, the millet just took off. Now later in the season, the other stuff kind of came along, but if you, and I did collect biomass information, but the biomass down here, the combination of corn, which was almost nothing, and the cover crop, and up on the other end where it was about a 50-50 split of corn and cover crop, the total biomass was the same. So our goal of we want to build biomass to help build soil was actually accomplished. And we had a field day, we almost didn't have it because it was such an embarrassment. There's virtually no corn out there except for a little bit on the end here. It was just awful. But we said, well, we can learn some things and all of that. So that's what we did. Questions? I mean, and this is kind of like radical. So you don't want to go do this with your best field, especially if it's next to the highway. And so my belief is this next year, I'm probably going to be more aggressive with mowing and kind of trying to tone down the cover crops a little bit. We're trying to figure out how to feed the crop because there ain't going to be any manure, there isn't going to be any synthetic nitrogen, and the ground still isn't very good. So I'm kind of trying to negotiate chicken pellets, but I guess they're hard to find these days. So we do want to back off just a little bit and try to get some corn out of the deal. But he is going to go full organic. He is so pleased with how this field turned out that we're just going to go down that road. And then this is one of the earlier guys that I worked with. He does not have livestock, but he buys a lot of manure and nutrients. So he had his applicator come in and modify his shanks on his liquid machine so that he could put the nutrients right next to the plant. This is definitely the thing to do. In most of my other experiments, in the interest of simplicity and not irritating my primary customer, I would tell them just do whatever you're going to do. If it's strip tilled, you strip till on 30 inches. You put nutrients down, you put your regular nutrients down, and we just won't have that as a variable. But for the people that are making 60-inch rows work, they are clear that you want to put the nutrients as in good approximation to the plants. You certainly wouldn't want to put them way out in the middle of everything. So I think there's some possibilities there.
Is that liquid hog manure?
This was hog, yeah. That was hog country.
And what kind of rate were they putting on when they were doing that?
Sorry.
Yeah, I know.
I just plant the corn. Harvest the sun. Sorry. So the key takeaway, if you get nothing else out of the time you've given to me this afternoon, I'm assuming you all are interested in organic enough that you're saying, well, what's this organic thing all about? Or I'm here because I want to be successful at organic. On a sample of two different, I'm pretty certain it's two different certifiers in opposite corners of the state of Iowa, they are saying that what's between the 60-inch rows can be a rotation in the organic world. And so for me, that's a big deal. I mean, and the guy here with the manure spreader, that's his whole strategy. He's saying, okay, I can grow continuous organic corn in a field by rotating at 30 inches. It's not and there was a session yesterday about rotations, and I didn't hear anything in that says there's anything about that doesn't fit the organic certification thing. Now, I kind of like 90-inch, but there will be a significant yield hit unless we figure out some other magical solution. But that gives you a lot more wiggle room for, what you have in between for your rotational crop. Does that make sense? Because you guys know this way better than me. You gotta ask the questions here, folks. If the answer is yes, then yeah, continuous. Then this got added late last night. What I learned yesterday is the relative price of beans and corn. Beans are way higher than corn in the organic domain right now, right? So it's like, okay, I don't want to grow continuous corn if I can make more money with organic beans. So I found another graphic. I use the powerful words in computerdom called save as. So this is kind of a map of what I've done for my test strips. So I would have a 20-foot strip of 30-inch corn baseline. In some cases, I might have cover crops in half of it, but I will always have 4 rows of what everybody else up and down the road is doing. That's my baseline. And so then we come in here and this happens to show twin rows. It could be something else. These can be 60-inch. They can be singles or doubles or whatever. So I'm thinking, and I left a bunch of space there, I'd love to have you guys challenge me with, or have more importantly, much more importantly, have a discussion among yourselves on if you could do something like this, how would you use that space in between so that you got a corn space this year and maybe a low profile crop like pumpkins. There's people grow or some other higher value crop. And that my grower that I'm working with currently that had the plot here I showed you, he really wants to put a high value crop in there. And like purple hull peas is a good example. They're good at farmers markets. They're high value. Now you get into questions about labor and harvesting and all of that. So the message that I have for you is this space in here is really an opportunity space. Yes?
Years ago, we were doing some twin row like that, but we were going around and come back, U-turn and come back, and offset. But then we had soybeans in between there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the combine would take the twin rows out without any trouble. But with the corn, bean rows in there, they took one row of the corn head out on each, so you'd have
Okay.
that in there, and then built hoods and that over it, so that the beans would go underneath the corn head.
Yep.
Then they would come in with the bean head and combine the beans.
Yeah. There's a guy from West Union, Lauren Steinlage, kind of is doing the relay crop thing. And you get into that if you got soybeans growing up in rye, because he's harvesting rye with a platform and then guarding the sickle head, so it just pushes the beans over gently and then harvests his rye. And then he comes back later when the beans come up and comes through with, and sometimes he's used his platform or he's used like what's called a row crop head. You probably know what they are. Young pups don't probably, but unless you worked on one.
I've ran one.
I have one of each, so yeah, I think that's exactly the kind of conversation, because depending on what your combine tread is, it may be part of the solution on dealing with corn residue. And it might be that you come in and actually there's a low growing crop here, squash, pumpkins, whatever, that you're not hurting with the combine in here harvesting it. I think I maybe missed the point earlier because I didn't have the image, but my strategy is to put the cover crop in just as soon as I can. I really like drilling compared to broadcasting. I think it's better use of the seed, you just get better results. And we had some where we sort of broadcasted. We were straddling 30-inch rows, so I just locked up 2 of those ranks on the drill and let it drip out. I had nothing in the corn rows, and yet the drill rows came in really nicely. So I love drilling, and I like getting a pretty heavy cover crop in as early as possible, because that, in this case, that was our best shot against the weeds. I did burn up all the time, that's good, oh. So yeah, that's the game. Yes, sir.
Did you see any yield loss when you had the cover crops in the 60-inch space there?
I don't have very much data with that. I'm gonna say it's gonna be pretty small.
Okay.
I
Um,
didn't notice too much this last year when we did some 60-inch row compared to.
Oh, you did?
30-inch.
well, you're the
But I
expert
screwed
here.
I screwed the experiment up by thinking I had more of the 60-inch rows there, and I come back through and it was 30-inch rows then, and so we didn't have the weight on it, but it didn't seem to make a whole lot of difference.
Yeah, yeah.
We had cover crops in between, so
Yeah.
for cattle coming feed later.
I would say there's probably other factors that will matter more than the cover crops. For instance, if you're just doing 60-inch singles, your plants are pretty close together. I think it's more important to do a good job of planting at that very high population than when they're 6 inches apart. And I've got friends that are growing stuff in little greenhouses and under time-lapse cameras and all that, so we're trying to understand how all this stuff fits together.
We did double the population on
Yeah,
that too.
you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that would be my, until you know better, and the knowing better would be eyes wide open about the variety and a serious conversation with the agronomist that's helping your seed salesman. So, yes, sir.
So when you're planning that, are you considering like this population with a flex year versus a fixed year when you're doing it?
I would have thought that a flex ear is better. Most of the seeds have kind of, in the commercial world, they've kind of evolved towards more flexy. But there was a guy that was an LG seed dealer, and they did some of this experimenting. They said they got better results with a determinate ear.
Yeah, because if you bump, it's gonna have the same amount no matter the row spacing, and the flex
Yeah.
gives you that buffer if you
Right.
plant it higher pop, you're gonna actually be decreasing the value of it because you're planting more seed
Yeah.
instead of fixed.
My default thinking, I don't have any data, show me your data. I don't have any data, but my thinking is as the population goes up, a determinant will serve you better.
Yeah.
If you don't have the extra population, then you'd like to have more of a flex ear.
Yeah.
But once the ears get about so big, they just quit, you know. I did some really low population stuff just for the heck of it. I will take like if I have a half-mile field and that's all I've got, I'll take a little corner of it and I do my 0.4%, just doing something crazy. So I got, and that's really kind of how we got to with the twins. Did that like on year 2 or 3. It's kind of, whoa, that's really good. So, other questions? I appreciate your questions. I really do. So does this, yeah.
Well, so, I mean, do you feel like you have to be over 30 inches wide? You know, if you go in and broadcast buckwheat in 30-inch rows, not successful probably.
When are you broadcasting it?
After last cultivation, you know,
Okay. I think once it canopies, I mean,
You're
in
done.
60-inch rows, a lot of corn plants will just about canopy. They just about get leaf to leaf. I don't know if that was your experience or not.
No, they didn't canopy.
So you had-
We
you had-
a lot of cover crops in between. so
Okay, and your cover crops were pretty good?
Not too bad, you know.
Okay, yeah. What'd you have for cover crop, just on it?
Oh, I'd have to ask my son that for sure.
Okay, but,
We
yeah,
had a mixture of stuff.
yep, good, good. I like the idea of the mix, but I don't understand the agronomy and biology. The soil sample data says that we moved on 2 soil samples that were like 10 feet apart, 30-inch baseline versus the 90-inch twins. We moved the organic matter 0.15%, which is not a lot, but that's 2 different labs giving us the same difference, even though their absolute numbers were a little different. So I think we're on the right track. If it had said a whole percent, we'd have probably thought something's wrong, you know, because you can't, people say you can't move it that much that quickly, but we're sure trying.
Do you have any data on like the quality of the corn once it was produced?
No. A friend of mine did do some heirloom Bloody Butcher. If you're a corn geek, you understand Bloody Butcher and all that stuff. And you know, he had it worked for him and all that. Yeah, it's been a humbling journey for me, and fun, just an absolute delight. Yes, sir.
How far apart are your twin rows, the two,
10 inches.
10 inches?
That's about all the row units here are John Deere twin row units. We don't do anything with staggering the plants, but what I've typically done, because it's electric drives, I'll set a different population in one half of the twin versus the other. So over time, they get to where they're either like this or like this. And I can go out there, pick them one ear at a time, and I can't see the difference.
Have you ever done it where you got set 30 inches apart and then you skip to 60, like 4 out of 6 instead
Yeah,
of...
yep. Some of my original data was that way, and his yield came out about the same also.
Is that a bit more idiot-proof for some of us beginners?
Well, his position was, well, I'm not sure I'd do that again because I'm wasting sunlight. I would come at it a little bit differently. My corn head, now I'm a futurist. That's my problem. I care more about what I'd like to do than what I did do. But my corn head is perfectly happy at 10 inches of row spacing. 15's pushing it, you know. It better not be down and all of that. I would like to have, I really shouldn't be saying it, but my thinking is I'd like to have a pair of twins that are 10 inches apart, and then come over here on a 30-inch center and have another pair of twins. So now I got 10 inches, and 20 inches. So that original slide I showed you was 20-inch corn. And my logic is, if you're not gonna put a really good cover crop in there, you better get it canopied, because you don't have the chemical opportunity, and but you also have burned the bridge on cultivation. So now you're kind of, this is a radical idea, you know, and I haven't planted any like that, but my thinking is, with the 60-inch rows, I could say I'm getting the same population in the field. So I'm entitled to the same yield if I don't do anything stupid. But when I go to 90-inch, that's starting to get kind of wide. So I'm trying to say, well, can I make these 2 rows, can I put another pair in there, so that of all 4 rows, every one of them is either an edge or next to an edge. Because in my original data, remember, the only 4 that mattered were the 2 outside on either side, and they were only 20 inches apart. So that would be a very intense 4 rows of corn, which then would let me have 10 foot of opening for a 4-H bean or soybeans or whatever.
Well, so on your original data where you're growing 450 bushel corn or whatever on the outside, so what did the soybeans do on the inside? Are they?
They were, it was on the second picture on my brother's farm, we did the replicated trial thing, and it was interesting, the soybeans that were on the east side of a corn strip, so they had morning sun, did better than the average beans. The beans in the middle were the average, and the beans that were on the west side of a corn strip did significantly worse. So if you're a lucky bean in Iowa, you get shade, you get sun in the morning and shade in the afternoon. If you're an unlucky bean, it's the opposite. You don't get any morning sunlight, you get all the afternoon heat, and the beans kind of shut down when it's hot. Generally, the beans are off a little, and I had a plot one year. We chewed up about 40 acres. We called it a zebra plot. You couldn't tell whether it was beans and corn or corns and beans, and we had all kinds of combinations of corn rows versus bean rows. And when we got all done, it was like, it kind of depends on the relative value of corn versus beans, because the 2 markets kind of move together, but it's not absolute. And And when I got all done with that grower, I said, I don't think it's worth screwing around with it. And he didn't want to do cover crops. Well, or he actually owned an airplane in an application business. He wanted to fly on cover crops. And that means late in the season and all of that. So the pure strip intercropping, and there are people that are doing it, there's a few. There are people that are doing it and they're managing it and they're making it work. And I think the smaller your equipment is, the better your chances for success are. So with that, any other quick comments, feedback? Has this been useful for you? There's 10 pieces of paper here that are kind of like one slide. It's this slide that if you want to take it, it's just a little bit about who I am, what I do. If you go to YouTube and just YouTube this, and then I've got some playlists, but there's a field day. It has it has some comments from me that go into a little more detail about why I do what I do. And then it's got a really nice segment by the grower, Thompson Intro, I think it's called, of what he's trying to accomplish there. And his journey towards organics was pretty relevant. And then there's a number of sessions that are the assessment of the cover crop and what we did wrong and all that. Thank you, folks. I really appreciate your participation. Great.